or research that uses rigorous scientific methods to study issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dr. Brauer will share recent findings from this fast-growing discipline. With the right methods, it is possible to get people to behave more inclusively and to create a climate in which people from all backgrounds feel welcome and respected. Markus Brauer is a professor in the Department of Psychology with secondary appointments at the Wisconsin School of Business and the School of Medicine and Public Health at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He conducts both basic and applied research on intergroup relations, social norms, and sustainability behaviors. His research aims to develop and test interventions to change people's behaviors in a variety of domains, such as diversity, energy consumption, and health behaviors. He also serves as the executive director of the University of Wisconsin Institute for Diversity Science and the research director of the Wisconsin Louis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation. Please welcome Markus Brauer.
Thank you, Kevin, for this kind introduction. As Kevin mentioned, I've done this type of research for over 30 years, and there are a number of things that I've learned. One is there is a problem in that many pro-diversity initiatives are not evaluated. So in most domains, we demand evidence-based practices. We want evidence-based teaching practices. We certainly want our medical drugs to be tested in double-blind trials. But there's one domain where we have done that less, and that's in the diversity domain. Sometimes people ask me, is it even possible to evaluate pro-diversity initiatives? And the answer is, of course we can. We can study everything with rigorous scientific methods. I want to give you an example of what we do in our classroom evaluation studies, classroom intervention studies. So usually we recruit instructors, and after we have a list of instructors, we form pairs of classes that are similar with regard to size or humanities versus sciences, upper level, lower level, etc. After we form pairs, we randomly assign one classroom in each pair to the treatment condition, the intervention condition, and one classroom to the control condition. Then we implement our intervention, and then we wait a while, usually a semester or maybe even longer, and then we measure outcomes. What are our typical outcomes? Usually we use a climate survey. That climate survey contains a number of items about a variety of constructs, feelings towards other groups, whether you support the institution's diversity initiatives. Are you willing to confront discrimination when you witness it? Do you have friends that belong to different social groups? Then there are a number of items, scales, constructs that we measure. Of course, everybody is going to complete the items related to these constructs, but we're going to examine particularly the responses from members of marginalized groups. Because if our intervention is effective, we would, these individuals belonging to marginalized groups, to report an enhanced sense of belonging. We would expect them to evaluate the social climate more positively. We would expect them to report fewer discrimination experiences. And finally, we hope that they experience better mental and physical health. So this is a climate survey. Climate surveys are great, but self-reports are always with problems. So if we can, what we really like, we actually measure what we call consequential outcomes. So if we work in educational settings, we're looking at grades from students from marginalized groups, and we examine if our intervention reduced the achievement gap. We also look at dropouts. When we work with companies, organizations, we look at sick days or turnover among employees belonging to marginalized groups. And sometimes we even go in and we measure actual behaviors. So as my answer to the question, is it possible to evaluate pro-diversity initiative? Of course it is possible. The second thing that I've learned is many pro-diversity initiatives that are implemented on a large scale actually turn out to be ineffective. Take this article by Frank Dobbin and Alexandra Kalev. These researchers examines what is the change in number of women and number of ethnic minorities in management positions 5 years after a particular diversity program is implemented. Here are the results, and let me walk you through. So you have in row one, mandatory diversity training. So 5 years after a company introduces mandatory diversity training, you have 9% fewer Black women in management positions, and you also have 5% fewer Asian men and women in management positions. So this is an example where a particular pro-diversity initiative is not only not effective, it appears to be counterproductive. Take the research by a former graduate student here at the University of Wisconsin. He did what's called a meta-analysis. He examined nearly 500 studies, And his conclusion was that procedures to change implicit biases actually do not lead to behavior change. And the word's getting out. Here's an article by our colleague here at the University of Wisconsin, Tiffany Green, in the School of Medicine and Public Health. She wrote an article, the problem with implicit bias training, well, there's just little evidence that it leads to meaningful changes in behavior. So the question is, what does work? How do we create inclusive environments? And I have sort of 2 points that I want to raise today. One is we need a systematic approach to behavior change. And second is we need to change the context, and especially we need to change the social norms in that context. Let me walk you through each of these points. I started out with a systematic approach. What we need to do is we need to ask ourselves the question, what behavior do we want to change, and whose behavior do we want to change? What's our target behavior, and who is our target audience? And once we have answered that question, we want to understand what the barriers and benefits of the target audience are. Again, I'm going to go into detail here. So the question here is, what is our target behavior? What is actually the problem? Which behaviors need to change for members of marginalized groups to feel included, to feel welcome, and to feel respected? And the way we find out is we conduct focus groups with members of marginalized groups, and we conduct climate surveys. And again, we look primarily here at the responses from individuals belonging to marginalized groups. And the question that we need to try to answer at this stage is, what behaviors do we want to target? What needs to change around here? Are there procedures? Are there particular situations where discriminatory behaviors occur? And then the second question is, who's the target audience? Whose behaviors are we trying to change? In an educational context like the University of Wisconsin, do we want to change other students? Do we want to change the staff? Do we want to change the TAs? Is it the faculty? And then even with students, whose behavior? Is it those who are already egalitarian and we want to reinforce their behavior? Or do we want to change the behaviors of the people who are sort of middle of the road, who are not yet super egalitarian, right? So once we know who our target audience is, we want to talk to members of that target audience, and we want to find out what currently prevents them from engaging in the behavior that we want them to engage in. And we also want to find out what messages that the members of this target audience are going to be receptive to. So I have a completely different project. We try to talk to moderate conservatives about green energy. We are very sensitive. We actually convene focus groups, and then we try to find out what kind of messages sort of contain trigger words that actually prevent them, create reactance, whereas other types of messages they might be much more receptive to. It is one of the key laws of behavior change that we want to highlight the benefits that members of the target audience will experience if they engage, if they do the target behavior, the behavior that we want them to engage in. And just think about current diversity initiatives. Many of the framings are very negative. You're this, you're to blame, etc. I think we want to shift towards a more positive framing where we actually explain to members of our target audience, people whose behaviors we want to change, what the positive experiences are that they're going to have if they do the behavior that we want them to engage in, if they behave more inclusively. The second big point I want to bring across is we need to change the context, and especially we need to change people's perceptions of what social norms are. And that is incredibly important. People, if they go from one context to the next, they change their behaviors very rapidly. A person who moves from a neighborhood where nobody recycles to a neighborhood where virtually everybody recycles, and you can see that because the recycling bins are out in the street, that person will change their recycling behavior incredibly fast. And they will change that behavior without any changes in beliefs about whether climate change is man-made or human-made or not, or whether we're having a problem with global warming, yes or not. So what is one of the most powerful predictors is what's going on is in people's context. And it is somewhat surprisingly, it's generally believed that people behave according to their preferences or values. Sure, they do play a role, but sometimes, very often, what is underestimated is the powerful impact of the context and the powerful impact of social norms. So we really need to shape that context if we want to create inclusive environments. There are two ways to do that. One is institutional signals, and the other is people's beliefs about peers. So what you need in any organization or company or institution, you need a public commitment to diversity inclusion by the top management, and that has to be publicly displayed on the company's website. Here's an example of, it was the CEO of Michelin Tires. He recorded a 2-minute video where he explained that diversity and inclusion were core values of the companies, that is not only the ethically right thing, morally right thing to do, but also that helps Michelin Tires achieve its business goals. And then you need to communicate about these efforts that you do, and you need to be very open about it. And that is something that is very surprising. Many educational institutions and companies actually do implement pro-diversity initiatives. They do make an effort to remove institutional barriers, but then they fail to communicate about it. And there's the incorrect perception, oh, nothing is done around here, when in fact something is done about it. And for job applicants, it's incredibly important. Applicants from marginalized groups, they do go on companies' website and they do explore what actually is being done in that company to remove institutional barriers and make employees from marginalized groups feel welcome. The second is people behave according to what they believe that their peers do and what they believe their peers approve of. Therefore, it is incredibly important to highlight that their peers either behave inclusively or at least try to behave inclusively, and that they fully endorse the company's pro-diversity initiatives. You can achieve that in 2 ways. You can either communicate about the result of recent climate surveys, and it is a finding, and we have a recent publication, and it's going to come out soon, that suggests that people generally underestimate their peers' support for pro-diversity initiatives and their peers' commitment to inclusion. One way is to simply communicate about that. And the other thing is to highlight positive exemplars, highlight individuals who behave in an inclusive manner, and especially make inclusion visible. Very often, inclusion is sort of a private behavior. The more we make it visible, the more we show to people that their peers actually care about inclusion and support the institution's pro-diversity initiatives, the more you're going to change the context, and the more you're going to change people's perceptions of what's normative in that particular context. I have a take-home message, and then I want to briefly talk to you about the Institute for Diversity Science. This is the Wisconsin Science Festival, and I want to bring across that rigorous research conducted by behavioral scientists helps us understand how to create an inclusive environment. You need randomized controlled trials, and you need outcomes related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Then there are 2 points that I tried to bring across today. What you need is a systematic approach to behavior change. And what you need to change the context, because the context has an incredibly powerful impact on people's behaviors, including behaviors towards members of other social groups. I just want to briefly highlight that I'm the executive director of this new institute on campus, the Institute for Diversity Science. Are underlined below. We conduct basic, applied, and translational research related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's that empirical, rigorous research that I talked to you about before. We study topics in a variety of fields, whether it is climate change, sustainability, in educational settings, in business, and especially healthcare, health disparities, and of course, policing and law. I want to give a big shout out to the Institute chair, Dr. Angela Byers-Winston, who is responsible for all the programming and the major decisions made here in this institute. And I also want to alert your attention to that little button that's on the top right corner of our webpage. If you feel interested, if you want to support that kind of rigorous research related to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, please donate money to our institute. I'm very grateful to you. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for tuning in. And if you have questions, please feel free to paste these questions into the chat, and I will try to answer them. On Wisconsin.
Thank you for watching this Badger Talks live event produced by the University of Wisconsin-Madison through UW Connects Outreach and the Office of State Relations. Follow us on Facebook and YouTube to see the library of past recorded talks. Please visit badgertalks.wisc.edu to see the schedule of upcoming talks, Sign up for the Badger Talks email list and search the roster of over 400 UW experts who are available to give talks on important issues in your Wisconsin community.